Welcome to tonight's compilation of cheating stories, a series designed for those of you who enjoy a bit of drama while drifting off to sleep. Whether you're settling into bed or just looking for something engaging to listen to as you wind down, we've got you covered. Each story has been carefully selected to provide the most compelling and thought-provoking experiences, so you can let your mind wander as you relax and prepare for a good night's rest. Tonight's stories are a blend of shocking revelations, unexpected twists, and emotional journeys. You'll hear from people who have experienced betrayal firsthand and those who have navigated the complex emotions that come with it. Each story is unique, but they all share a common thread: how trust can be broken and the consequences that follow. So lie back, get comfortable, and enjoy listening to compelling cheating stories guaranteed to keep your attention.
I already know I'm an asshole. Now what I don't know is what to do about it. We got caught by his kid. I'm Jackie, 34 years old, and I've been best friends with Laura, 35 years old, since we were kids. We grew up together, went to the same schools, and even shared secrets that no one else knew. Our bond was unbreakable, or so I thought. Laura got married to Mike, 36 years old, about 10 years ago. And they have 2 kids, Liam, 7 years old, and Ella, 4 years old. I've been Aunt Jackie to them their whole lives. I was even the maid of honor at their wedding. But over the past year, something happened that I never imagined would. Mike and I started to get closer. Too close. It began innocently enough. We'd chat when Laura wasn't around, just about life, work, and the kids. Then the conversations became more personal, more flirtatious. We started meeting for coffee, which turned into dinners, and eventually we crossed a line that we shouldn't have. It became an affair. We both knew it was wrong, but we couldn't stop. The thrill, the secrecy, it all made it feel like something out of a movie. But it was real, and it was dangerous. We were careful, or so we thought. We only met when Laura was at work or when the kids were at school. I knew what we were doing was terrible, but I couldn't seem to pull away. Mike had become a huge part of my life, and I had convinced myself that maybe, somehow, this could work out. One afternoon, while Laura was at a weekend conference, Mike and I decided to spend the day together at his house. The nanny had taken the kids out for the day, so we were completely alone. We had been there for a few hours, just enjoying each other's company, when the nanny brought Liam home early from his playdate because he had a stomachache. Neither of us heard the door open or realized he was there until it was too late. I'll never forget the look on his face when he walked into the bedroom and saw us. He was so confused, standing there in the doorway, staring at his dad, who wasn't wearing anything, and at me, Aunt Jackie. Liam looked up at his dad and asked, "Why don't you have clothes on? And why is Aunt Jackie in Mommy's bed?" My heart dropped. I tried to cover myself, but the damage was done. Mike jumped up, scrambling to find an excuse, but what could he say? We both tried to downplay it, to tell Liam that he didn't understand what he saw, that we were just playing a game. But Liam is smart, and even though he's only 7, he knew something wasn't right. That night, when Laura came home, Liam couldn't keep it to himself. He asked her why Dad was in bed with Aunt Jackie without clothes. Laura was horrified and demanded an explanation from both of us. We tried to lie at first, to tell her that Liam must have misunderstood, but she wasn't buying it. Eventually, the truth came out. Mike confessed everything, and I couldn't deny it anymore. Laura was devastated. She broke down right in front of us, asking how we could do this to her, how I, her best friend, could betray her like this. Now everything is ruined. Laura hasn't spoken to me since. She's filed for divorce from Mike, and the kids are caught in the middle of this mess. I've lost my best friend, my godchildren, and my self-respect. People in our community have found out, and I can't go anywhere without feeling the weight of their judgment. Part of me wants to believe that this was all just a terrible mistake, that it wasn't entirely my fault, but another part of me knows that I crossed a line that should never have been crossed. I betrayed my best friend in the worst possible way, and now I'm paying the price for it. Is there any way to make amends, or have I destroyed too much to ever be forgiven?
I don't think people understand just how far I'd go to prove a point. Let me tell y'all a story about my cheating husband. My husband's been pulling a lot of late-nighters recently. So imagine my surprise when I got a call at 3 a.m., him begging me to pick him up. I drive to this random house, looking around, not seeing his car. Suddenly, he steps out from behind a tree, in nothing but his underwear and socks. Turns out the woman's husband came home, and mine had to dive out the window. His clothes? Still inside. He got in the car, and he breathlessly said, "Just take me home." I looked up and said, "She just threw your shoes out the window." Spoiler alert, she didn't. I told him, "They're in the bushes." He ran to look, and y'all, I drove off, leaving his sorry self standing there in his skivvies. He's not talking to me now, but that's all right. He can chat with my lawyer instead. So did I go too far? Or was leaving him there the right call? Let me know what y'all think in the comments.
If you've ever faced a betrayal, this story might be for you. Am I wrong for confronting my husband about his Tinder profile after discovering his double life? I've been married to Tom for 12 years. We have 2 beautiful kids, a nice home, and on the surface, a happy life. Tom works a full-time job during the week, and on weekends, he's in a band that plays at various bars and small venues around the region. It's something he's passionate about, and while it means we don't see him much on weekends, I've always supported his dreams. Recently, a close friend of mine, Rachel, approached me and said she needed to talk about something sensitive. She asked me to meet her at a coffee shop, which struck me as odd since we usually chat at each other's homes. But I went, sensing it was important. When I walked through the door, Rachel's face told me everything. She looked nervous, almost guilty. We sat down, and after a few moments of awkward small talk, she blurted out, "I saw Tom's profile on Tinder." I was stunned. Tom and I are married, obviously, and the thought of him on a dating app was unimaginable. Rachel explained that she's newly single and had been swiping through Tinder when she came across Tom's profile. She recognized him instantly, but what shocked her even more were the things he had written on his profile. He described himself as single, adventurous, and always looking to test boundaries. There were even references to liking rough play, hair pulling, and other things I'd never heard him mention. According to Rachel, his profile showed that he had been active recently, likely while he was away on one of his weekend trips with the band. She wasn't sure how to tell me, but she felt I needed to know. I thanked her for telling me, even though inside, I felt like my world was falling apart. After that meeting, I spent the rest of the day trying to process what she had told me. When Tom came home that Sunday night, he was his usual self, loving, attentive, and fully present. It was almost impossible to reconcile the man in front of me with the one described in that Tinder profile. I felt like I was living with a stranger. Instead of confronting him outright, I decided to gather more information. Over the next few weeks, I looked for signs, anything that could confirm what Rachel had said. I checked his phone when I could, but it was always clean. I looked at his social media, but everything seemed normal. There was no trace of the man Rachel had described. But deep down, I knew she wasn't lying. I hatched a plan. The next weekend, when Tom was away with the band, I created a fake Tinder profile. I swiped through every profile in the area where Tom's band was playing until I found him. There he was, with his same profile picture that Rachel had described. I swiped right, and sure enough, we matched. He started chatting immediately, not knowing it was me. He was flirty, suggestive, and completely different from the man I thought I knew. I didn't waste time. I screenshot the conversation and saved everything I could as evidence. When Tom came home that Sunday, I sat him down and showed him the screenshots. He was silent at first, his face going pale. Then he tried to deny it, saying it was just a joke, something the guys in the band did for laughs. But the look in his eyes told me it was more than that. I told him I wanted him out of the house, at least for a while. I needed time to think, to figure out what this meant for us. He's been staying with a friend for the past week, and I still don't know what to do. Part of me feels like I'm overreacting. After all, he never actually met up with anyone as far as I know. But another part of me feels utterly betrayed. I can't trust him anymore, and that's the hardest part. So, am I the asshole for confronting my husband about his Tinder profile and kicking him out? Should I have given him a chance to explain? Or was I right to take action before things got worse? I'm torn between wanting to save my marriage and feeling like I deserve better than a husband who leads a double life.
Am I wrong for leaving my pregnant wife Angela after finding out she gave me an STD? My wife Angela and I have been married for 15 years. We've always had a solid relationship, and for most of those years we've been trying to have a baby. It's been a long, painful journey filled with failed attempts, medical interventions, and a lot of heartache. But 6 months ago, we finally got the news we'd been praying for. Angela was pregnant. This baby was nothing short of a miracle. Recently, I went to the doctor because I noticed a suspicious rash. After some tests, I was told I had an STD. I was shocked and confused because I've never cheated on Angela. The only logical explanation was that she had been unfaithful. When I confronted her, Angela broke down and told me a story that I never expected to hear. She said that a few months ago, she went out with some friends, had too much to drink, and ended up having a one-night stand with a stranger at a bar. She claimed it was a mistake, that she barely remembered it, and it meant nothing to her. But now, it means everything to me. I was devastated. After everything we've been through, this felt like the ultimate betrayal. I couldn't look at Angela the same way. I couldn't trust her anymore. So I packed a bag and left. Now I'm staying with my friend Mike, trying to figure out what to do next. I know Angela is pregnant with our miracle baby, but I also know I can't just pretend like nothing happened. I've spent years being faithful, loving, and supportive. And this is how she repays me? Angela has been calling and texting non-stop, begging me to come home, saying she's sorry and that she'll do whatever it takes to make things right. But I don't know if I can move past this. Some of my friends are telling me I'm overreacting and that I should think about the baby, but others are saying I have every right to leave after what she did. So am I the asshole for leaving my pregnant wife, Angela, after finding out she gave me an STD? Should I go back for the sake of our child, or is it okay to walk away from this betrayal?
The original poster has added an update to the following story. Am I wrong for leaving my pregnant wife, Angela, after finding out she gave me an STD? After I moved in with my friend Mike, things were tense but manageable. I was still trying to process everything that had happened, and I didn't know how to move forward. Angela had been relentless in trying to contact me, but I needed space. I couldn't just go back after what she'd done, no matter how much I loved her or how much we both wanted this baby. A few days ago, Angela showed up at Mike's place unexpectedly. I hadn't been answering her calls or texts, so I guess she decided to try her luck in person. I was surprised to see her, but I let her in. I figured maybe we could talk and finally get some closure, or at least start figuring out what to do next. While I was in the kitchen getting some water, I overheard Angela and Mike talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but something in their tone caught my attention. It was intimate. I couldn't make out everything, but I heard Angela say something like, "We have to tell him eventually," and Mike whisper back, "Not yet, Angie, not now." My heart started pounding. I felt like I was going to be sick. I walked into the living room, and the look on their faces told me everything I needed to know. Mike's face went pale, and Angela looked like she was about to cry. I confronted them immediately. "What the hell is going on here? What do you mean, tell him eventually?" "Tell me what?" Mike stammered something unintelligible, and Angela burst into tears. After what felt like an eternity, she finally blurted out the truth. It was Mike. Mike was the stranger at the bar, the one-night stand that had meant nothing. It had been him all along. Apparently, that night out with the girls wasn't just a one-time mistake. Mike and Angela had been seeing each other behind my back for months. They'd been sneaking around, meeting up whenever they could. The night at the bar was just the first time they'd hooked up, but it wasn't the last. Mike had even suggested that she lie and say it was a random guy at a bar if I ever found out. I was in complete shock. This was my best friend, my closest friend since college, the guy I turned to in my darkest hour, and he was the one who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't believe that they had been carrying on this affair right under my nose while we were trying to bring a child into the world, no less. But it gets crazier. Angela, still sobbing, admitted that she wasn't even sure if the baby was mine or Mike's. That miracle baby we had been praying for might actually be the result of her affair with Mike. They were both too terrified to get a paternity test, knowing that it could destroy everything. I lost it. I yelled at Mike to get out of his own house, that I never wanted to see his face again. He tried to apologize, but I was done listening. I told him that he wasn't just a traitor, he was a coward for lying to me and for ruining my marriage. Angela tried to stop me as I walked out the door, but I couldn't even look at her. I don't know where I'm going to go from here. My life is in shambles. My marriage is over, my best friend is a backstabbing piece of shit, and the baby that I thought was a miracle might not even be mine. I have no idea what to do next, but one thing's for sure. I'm never going to trust anyone the same way again, so now not only do I have to deal with the betrayal and the STD, but I also have to question whether I've been living a lie this whole time. Am I the asshole for leaving Angela, or was it the only sane choice I had left? And what the hell do I do now? So what?
Final update. Am I the asshole for leaving my pregnant wife Angela after finding out she gave me an STD? After the devastating revelation that my wife Angela had been having an affair with my best friend Mike, I decided to kick them both out of my life. Angela moved in with Mike while they both waited for the baby to be born. It was a messy, complicated situation, but at least I got my house back and could start to heal. I needed that space to process everything that had happened. Angela and Mike tried to make their relationship work while they waited for the baby's arrival. As much as it hurt, I had to accept that my marriage was over, and I began the difficult process of moving on. Angela insisted on keeping me updated on the pregnancy, probably out of some twisted sense of guilt or obligation, but I mostly ignored her texts. The thought that the baby might not be mine was too painful to bear. Finally, the day came when the baby was born. Angela and Mike did a paternity test right away. I braced myself for the results, not knowing whether I wanted the baby to be mine or not. On one hand, I had always dreamed of becoming a father, but on the other, the thought of raising a child born out of betrayal was something I wasn't sure I could handle. The results came in. I wasn't the father. And get this, Mike wasn't the father either. Apparently, the one-night stand had been true, along with a repeating affair with Mike. When Mike found out, he kicked her out. I have no idea where she is now, but finding out that baby wasn't mine was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I grieved the loss of the child I thought might be mine, but there was also a deep sense of relief. The situation was finally over, and I could fully close that chapter of my life. With Angela and Mike out of the picture, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work trying to keep my mind occupied. It was during this time that I met Shannon. Shannon was my age, and we crossed paths at work when she was assigned to a project I was leading. She was smart, funny, and had a kind of warmth that I hadn't realized I was missing. As we got to know each other, Shannon opened up about her own recent breakup. It turned out her ex had also been unfaithful, and she was still picking up the pieces of her life. We bonded over our shared experiences and quickly became close. There was something about Shannon that made me feel hopeful again, like maybe life had something good in store for me after all. Our friendship slowly evolved into something more. It wasn't rushed or forced, it just felt right. We were two people who had been through hell and back, finding solace and happiness in each other. A few months into our relationship, Shannon told me she was pregnant. I was overwhelmed with joy. This time there was no doubt, no fear, no betrayal hanging over us. It was just pure happiness. Shannon and I both knew how much this baby meant to us after everything we'd been through. We started planning our future together, excited to build a life as a family. As I look back on everything that happened, I realized that leaving Angela was the hardest but best decision I ever made. It allowed me to find Shannon and start a new chapter, one filled with love, trust, and the family I'd always wanted. Every once in a while I get a text from Mike. So far I have completely ignored him. I am 100% sure it'll stay that way. Now I'm about to become a father for real, and this time, it's with the woman I know I'm meant to be with. After all the heartbreak and pain, I finally got my happily ever after.
There you have it, folks. A happily ever after for the record books. We're happy for him and wish him the best.
Am I wrong for setting up my narcissistic husband to cheat so I could get out of our marriage? I thought I'd found my fairy tale when I met Philip. We got married within 6 months of meeting each other, and I was completely head over heels in love. He was charming, attentive, and everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. But just 6 months into the marriage, the man I thought was perfect started showing his true colors. It wasn't long before I realized that Philip was a narcissist. I started seeing the signs, subtle at first, but then glaringly obvious. He would constantly twist my words and make me doubt my own reality. I'd say something and he'd later insist I never did, or that I said something completely different. It was like living in a world where I couldn't trust my own mind. He craved attention like it was oxygen. He'd go out of his way to charm everyone around him, friends, family, even strangers, just to get compliments and praise. At first, I thought he was just being friendly, but then I realized he needed that validation constantly. When I was going through a tough time at work, he didn't offer support or comfort. Instead, he made it about him, complaining that my stress was affecting his mood and making him look bad in front of others. It was always about him. He'd made me sign a strict prenup before we got married, protecting his assets and leaving me with practically nothing if we ever divorced. The one thing I'd insisted on adding, though, was a clause that nullified the prenup if he cheated. Back then, I'd never imagined he would, but as soon as I realized what a monster I'd married, I knew I had to take action. Enter Cynthia, my cousin. On the surface, she's all rainbows and sunshine, sweet, charming, always with a smile on her face. But underneath, she's a viper. Over the years, she's proven just how self-serving she can be. She convinced our elderly grandmother to give her the family heirloom jewelry, claiming she'd take better care of it. She sold it within a week. When our aunt was struggling financially, Cynthia pretended to be sympathetic, but then refused to lend her money, saying she couldn't afford it. The next day, she posted pictures of her new designer handbag on social media. She once spread a nasty rumor about a mutual friend just to climb the social ladder, not caring about the fallout for anyone else involved. Knowing what kind of person Cynthia was, I started planting seeds. I'd talk about how amazing Philip was, how lucky I was to have him. I made sure to make her think she could never get a husband as wonderful as him. Then, I'd mention Cynthia to Philip, highlighting how beautiful and interesting she was. Soon enough, I started orchestrating situations to push them together. I'd invite her over for a movie night, then suddenly get a headache and retreat to my room, leaving them alone. I watched them get closer and closer, and I enjoyed every second. Philip was the charming man I'd fallen for, showing Cynthia the same facade he'd shown me in the beginning, and Cynthia, she fell for it. She started trying to seduce him, and I didn't lift a finger to stop it. In fact, I encouraged it. Once I was sure they were having an affair, I made sure my evidence was ironclad. I hired a private detective to take photos, and I even planted cameras in the hotel rooms where they met. I went into debt, maxing out every credit card I had to get the evidence I needed, knowing the payoff would be worth it. When I had everything I needed, I confronted Philip and filed for divorce. Thanks to that prenup clause, I got half of everything. Last I heard, Philip and Cynthia are together, but they're far from happy. Apparently, living with a narcissist isn't all it's cracked up to be. 2 narcissists together? That must be hell. Now here's the question. Should I feel bad about setting them up? On one hand, I manipulated the situation to get what I wanted, a way out of my marriage with financial security. On the other hand, Philip was a toxic person, and Cynthia is exactly where she deserves to be. Part of me feels a little guilty, but another part of me thinks they both got what they had coming. So, am I wrong for setting up my narcissistic husband to cheat so I could get out of our marriage? Or was it just a necessary move to protect myself from a life of misery?
Oh, we love stories like this, particularly when they share all the details.
No.
Am I the asshole for not wanting to attend my cousin's wedding after she married my ex who cheated on me with her, and now my family is mad at me? Advice needed. So here's the deal. About 3 years ago, I, a 25-year-old female, was in a serious relationship with my ex-boyfriend Jake, who was 27 years old. We were together for nearly 4 years, and I genuinely thought he was the one. We had even talked about getting married, but about a year before we broke up, I noticed that something was off. He was distant, often busy with work, and his phone was suddenly a no-go zone. After a while, I discovered that Jake was cheating on me with my cousin Sarah, who was 23 years old. It was a complete shock. Sarah and I were really close growing up, and I couldn't believe she would do something like that. The betrayal from both of them was devastating. I ended things with Jake immediately, and Sarah and I haven't spoken since. My family knew about the situation, and while they were supportive of me at first, they didn't exactly cut Sarah off. They made excuses like, she's young and made a mistake, or Jake is the one who's really at fault. Fast forward to now, Sarah and Jake are getting married. To say I'm still hurt would be an understatement. My family, however, seems to have completely moved on. My parents, aunts, uncles, and even my siblings are all excited about the wedding. They keep telling me how I need to put the past behind me and show that I'm the bigger person by attending the wedding. I told them I'm not going. I don't want to sit there and watch the man who broke my heart marry my cousin who betrayed me. It's too much. But now my family is furious with me, saying I'm being petty, selfish, and holding on to a grudge. They've been sending me guilt-trippy messages about how I'll regret missing a family event and how I need to grow up. They even tried to gaslight me by saying that it's not a big deal and people cheat, it happens, as if I'm overreacting. I'm honestly at my breaking point. Part of me wonders if they're right and if I should just go to keep the peace, but the other part of me feels like I deserve to protect my own well-being.
So, what do you think? Is she wrong for not wanting to attend her cousin's wedding, knowing the cousin is marrying her ex, who he just happened to cheat on her with? Or is she being as selfish as her family says she is? Is she justified in avoiding further trauma by staying far, far away?
I think I messed up, but not in the way you might think. We were together for 7 years, engaged for 5, and finally a courthouse wedding last month. 2 days later, I find out he's been unfaithful. He lied about the affair's duration, saying it was just a month of picture exchanges. But the truth? 18 months. She ghosted him because he kept lying about why they couldn't meet up. In therapy, we decided he should move out so I could process everything. Now, none of our friends will take him in for even a week. His only option is his dad's place. No bed, no internet. I offered to pay for a bed and internet there, but he says I'm the bad guy for not moving out myself. He's unemployed. I work early, an hour and a half away. Should I move out because of his actions? What would you do? Tell me in the comments.
Am I wrong for secretly filing for divorce after this? Imagine being married for 8 years, together for 12. Now picture discovering your partner's affair through a series of heartbreaking snoops. That's my story. I'm 34, my wife's 35. She started acting cold last March and my gut told me something was off. After some detective work, I found out she was emotionally, then physically, involved with a coworker. I kept acting like everything was normal. We still had protected sex, date nights, and activities, but behind the scenes, I was collecting evidence and working with my attorney. 4 months later, she was served divorce papers out of the blue. I closed our mutual credit cards, took my half from the joint account, and got a clear STD test. She broke down, tried to talk, but I acted indifferent. Truth is, I've been crying secretly some nights since I found out. Some friends say I should have warned her, given her time to prepare, but was I wrong? What would you have done? Hey everyone! I want to share a story with you and get your thoughts. It's a tough one, and I'm really struggling with whether I'm making the right decision. Here it goes. 4 months ago, my sister lost her husband. It was a devastating time for her. She was left with a newborn and 2 kids under 5. As her brother, I felt it was my duty to help her out. So I packed my bags and moved in with her to support her through this tough time. It was a challenging time, but I was happy to be there for my sister. We got through the days together, and I tried to make things as normal as possible for her kids. When I got back home, I was relieved to be with my wife again. But soon after, she tearfully confessed something that shattered me. While I was gone, she had a one-night stand with a guy she met on Tinder. She said it only happened once, and that she couldn't live with the guilt. She begged for my forgiveness, claiming it was a mistake and that it meant nothing. But here's the thing, to me, it wasn't just a mistake. You can't just open Tinder and accidentally fall on a, well, you know, it's a premeditated process. You have to download the app, create a profile, swipe, match, chat, and then arrange to meet. It's not something that just happens. It's planned. I felt betrayed. It wasn't just the physical act that hurt. It was the fact that she made a series of conscious decisions that led to that point. She chose to meet someone else while I was away helping my sister through one of the hardest times of her life. I've talked to friends and family trying to make sense of it all. Some say I should forgive her, that people make mistakes. Others agree with me, saying it's a deal breaker because of the intent behind it. So, am I wrong for divorcing my wife after she had a one-night stand? Some might say yes, that forgiveness and second chances are important. But for me, the premeditation and the betrayal were too much to overcome.
Sometimes a lack of loyalty can sting in ways you couldn't imagine. Am I wrong for refusing to attend events at my mother-in-law's house after she tried to cheat on her husband with my little brother? I'm Charlotte, 30 years old, and I've been married to Mark, who's 34, for 5 years. Mark and I have a pretty solid relationship, and I've always gotten along with his family, at least until a few months ago. Everything blew up when I discovered something I never thought I'd have to deal with. My mother-in-law, Deborah, who is 58, tried to cheat on her husband with my little brother, Chris, who's 32. To give some context, Mark and I have always been close to our families. We both grew up in the same town, so it's not uncommon for us to have gatherings with both sides of the family. Chris has known Deborah for as long as Mark and I have been together, and he's always been polite and friendly with her, just like he is with everyone. Chris is a nice guy, handsome, single, and successful, but I never imagined Deborah would see him as anything more than my little brother. It all started during a family barbecue at Deborah's house. Mark and I were mingling with everyone, and I noticed that Deborah was spending an unusual amount of time talking to Chris. At first, I didn't think much of it. Chris is easy to talk to, and Deborah can be chatty, especially after a few glasses of wine. But as the day went on, I started noticing more. She was laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, touching his arm when she spoke to him, and giving him these lingering looks that made me uncomfortable. I mentioned it to Mark, who brushed it off as me being paranoid. "She's just being friendly," he said. I tried to convince myself that he was right, that I was just reading too much into it, but something in my gut told me otherwise. A few weeks later, Chris called me, sounding really awkward and uncomfortable. He told me that Deborah had been texting him. At first, just casual things, asking how he was doing or talking about family stuff. But then the messages got more personal. She started complimenting him, telling him how handsome he was, and how she wished she'd met someone like him when she was younger. Chris, being the decent guy he is, tried to politely deflect, but Deborah didn't get the hint. It all came to a head when Deborah invited Chris over to her house one evening. She told him she needed help with some house repairs and wanted his advice. Chris went over, not suspecting anything at first, but when he got there, he quickly realized that Deborah had no intention of discussing house repairs. She was dressed in a way that was completely inappropriate for the occasion. Think low-cut dress, too much makeup, and a lot of perfume. She poured them both glasses of wine and started flirting with him openly. Chris was horrified. He made an excuse to leave and got out of there as fast as he could. After that, Chris blocked her number and called me to tell me everything. I was furious. Not only was Deborah making my brother incredibly uncomfortable, but she was also betraying her husband, Mark's dad, John, who is one of the sweetest men I've ever met. The whole situation made me sick to my stomach. I immediately told Mark what had happened. At first, he was in disbelief, thinking there had to be some misunderstanding. But when Chris showed him the messages and described what had happened, Mark couldn't deny it anymore. He was devastated. He confronted Deborah, who at first tried to play it off as a joke, saying she was just having a little fun, and that Chris misunderstood her intentions. But when Mark pressed her, she admitted that she had been feeling lonely and wanted some attention. She claimed it was a harmless flirtation, and begged Mark not to tell his dad. This put Mark in an incredibly difficult position. He was disgusted with his mother, but didn't want to blow up his parents' marriage, especially since his dad had no idea. We both agreed that, for the sake of the family, we wouldn't tell anyone else, especially not John. But I couldn't bring myself to see Deborah the same way ever again. Since then, I've refused to attend any events at Deborah's house. I just can't stomach the thought of being around her, pretending everything is normal when she crossed such a huge line. I feel betrayed, not only for myself, but for my brother and for John, who's completely in the dark. Mark understands why I feel this way, but it's caused a lot of tension between us. He still goes to family events, but I stay home, which has raised questions from his family. I've made excuses so far, but people are starting to notice that something is off. Deborah, on the other hand, has been acting like nothing happened. She continues to send invitations to both of us, acting all hurt when I don't show up. She's even tried to call me a few times to talk, but I've ignored her calls. I just can't face her. Mark thinks that I should at least try to make peace for the sake of the family, but I'm not sure I can ever forgive her for what she did. Every time I think about it, I get angry all over again. I know this is affecting my marriage. Mark is caught in the middle, trying to keep the peace with his mom while also understanding why I'm so upset. He's not pressuring me to go, but I can tell it bothers him that I'm so adamant about staying away. Part of me wonders if I'm being too harsh, if I should just suck it up and go for the sake of family unity. But another part of me feels like going would be condoning what she did, and I can't do that. So, am I the asshole for refusing to attend events at my mother-in-law's house after she tried to cheat on her husband with my little brother? Should I try to make peace, or am I right to stand my ground and keep my distance from someone who betrayed my trust so deeply?
If you've ever been stuck between a rock and a hard place, this next story might be for you. Am I the asshole for telling my boss's wife about his affair and pretending it was a mistake? Hi, I'm Sarah, 33, and I work as an executive assistant at a mid-sized tech company. I've been with the company for about 5 years now, and I've always prided myself on being professional, competent, and loyal. My boss, Tom, 45, is the CEO. He's smart, ambitious, and has always treated me well. Professionally, that is. I've seen him make some questionable decisions in his personal life, but I've always stayed out of it. After all, it's none of my business what he does outside of work. Or so I thought. About 6 months ago, I started noticing some changes in Tom's behavior. He'd always been very focused at work, but suddenly he was sneaking out for long lunches, taking mysterious phone calls, and staying late at the office for no apparent reason. At first, I chalked it up to the stress of the job, but then I noticed something else. Tom had started spending a lot more time with Rachel, 29, a marketing consultant we'd recently brought on board. Rachel is young, attractive, and very good at her job, but it became clear pretty quickly that their relationship wasn't strictly professional. I saw the way they looked at each other, the subtle touches, and the way they'd disappear together for hours at a time. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. The thing is, Tom is married to Linda, 43, a lovely woman who I've met several times at company events. Linda is smart, kind, and completely devoted to Tom. They've been married for over 15 years and have 2 kids together. Knowing this made it really hard for me to ignore what I was seeing. I felt like I was complicit in Tom's affair just by knowing about it and not doing anything. But what could I do? I wasn't about to confront Tom. I mean, he's my boss. And telling Linda outright felt too extreme. But I couldn't just keep quiet either. It was eating me up inside, especially when Linda would stop by the office, all smiles, asking me how Tom was doing. I felt like I was lying to her every time I said, "He's doing great." Then, about 2 months ago, I made a decision that I'm still not sure was the right one. I decided to tell Linda about the affair, but I wanted to make it seem like a mistake. I didn't want her to know that I had been sitting on this information for months. I figured if she found out by accident, it would somehow be easier for her to take, and it wouldn't seem like I was meddling in their marriage. So here's what I did. Tom had a big business trip coming up in New York, and Rachel was, of course, going with him. A few days before they were set to leave, I called Linda at home. I pretended I was trying to reach Tom, acting all flustered and hurried. I told her I needed to confirm his flight details because I hadn't heard back from Rachel yet about the hotel arrangements. I made it sound like I thought Linda already knew Rachel was going with him. Linda was silent for a moment, and then she asked, "Who's Rachel?" I could hear the confusion and suspicion in her voice, and I immediately felt guilty. But I stuck to my plan. I stammered and said something like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought Tom mentioned it to you. Rachel is the consultant he's been working with. They're both going to New York for the conference." Linda didn't say much after that, just thanked me for the information and hung up. I knew I had dropped a bomb, and now there was no going back. The fallout was worse than I expected. Tom came into the office the next day, furious. He didn't yell or scream, he's not that kind of guy, but he pulled me into his office and closed the door. He asked me point blank if I had told Linda about Rachel. I tried to play dumb, saying I must have mentioned it by accident, but Tom wasn't buying it. He didn't fire me, but things were tense between us for weeks. He started keeping more of his personal stuff to himself and was noticeably colder towards me. As for Linda, well, I didn't hear from her again until a few weeks later. She called me, and this time she was the one who was flustered. She asked me outright if I knew about the affair, and if I had told her on purpose. I felt terrible, but I stuck to my story. I told her it was an honest mistake, that I thought she already knew Rachel was going with Tom. I think she knew I was lying, but she didn't press the issue. Not long after that, I heard through the office grapevine that Tom and Linda were having serious marital problems. He was staying at a hotel, and they were in couples counseling. I felt awful. I never wanted to ruin their marriage. I just couldn't keep the secret anymore. But now, I'm left wondering if I should have just kept my mouth shut. After all, what happens in their marriage is really none of my business, right? Tom eventually came back to work as if nothing happened, but I could tell things between him and Linda weren't the same. Rachel left the company a month after the trip, and we haven't heard from her since. I'm still at the same job, but the atmosphere has changed. Tom and I are cordial, but the trust we had is gone. And every time Linda's name comes up, I can't help but feel a pang of guilt. So, Am I the asshole for telling my boss's wife about his affair and pretending it was a mistake? Should I have just kept quiet and let things play out on their own? Or was I right to let Linda know what was going on, even if it wasn't in the most honest way? I thought I was doing the right thing at the time, but now I'm not so sure.
If you've ever been wronged and wanted revenge, my story might resonate with you. Am I the asshole for blowing up my ex's life by reporting him for cheating on his taxes after he cheated on me? Hi everyone, I'm Emily, 28 years old, and I guess you could say I've been through the emotional ringer lately. For context, I was in a relationship with Dan, 32 years old, for about 3 years. We met through mutual friends, and everything felt like it clicked from the start. Dan was charming, successful, and had this way of making me feel like I was the most important person in the world, or so I thought. Dan works as a financial advisor. He's good at what he does, really good actually. He's the kind of guy who's always talking about investments, tax strategies, and how to make the most out of every dollar. I admired his drive and ambition, and I was proud of him for building such a successful career. But looking back, I think I was blinded by all of that. I didn't see the red flags, or maybe I didn't want to see them. About 6 months ago, I found out that Dan was cheating on me. It wasn't some dramatic reveal. I didn't catch him in the act or find incriminating texts. No, it was more subtle and painful. Dan started pulling away from me, canceling plans last minute and making excuses for why he couldn't spend time together. He became more secretive with his phone, which had never been an issue before. I felt like I was losing him, but whenever I tried to talk about it, he'd brush me off or make me feel like I was being paranoid. One night, he came home late from work again, smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. My heart sank, and I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted him, and after some back and forth, he finally admitted it. He'd been seeing someone else for a few months, a client of all people. He tried to justify it by saying that we'd grown distant and that it just happened. He even had the nerve to suggest that we could work things out and move past it. But I was done, completely and utterly done. I packed a bag and left that night, moving in with a friend while I figured out my next steps. The betrayal was so deep that I couldn't even begin to process it. I had loved this man, supported him and trusted him, and he threw it all away for some fling with a client. I was devastated, but I was also furious. That anger grew inside me, and I knew I couldn't just let him get away with it. Now, here's where the story takes a turn. While we were together, Dan would sometimes brag about how clever he was when it came to handling his taxes. He'd say things like, "You have to know how to play the system, Emily. It's all about knowing the loopholes." I didn't think much of it at the time. He worked in finance, after all, so I figured he knew what he was doing. But now, in my anger and hurt, those conversations came back to me. I started to piece together all the little things he'd mentioned over the years, how he'd underreport his income, claim deductions for things that were clearly personal expenses, and move money around in ways that didn't quite add up. He always made it sound like it was no big deal, just part of being smart with his money. But now, I saw it for what it really was. Cheating, plain and simple. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I couldn't just let this go. Dan had not only betrayed me, but was also blatantly breaking the law. And for what? To save a few bucks? I felt like he deserved to face the consequences of his actions, not just for cheating on me, but for cheating the system too. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I reported him to the IRS. I gathered up every piece of information I could remember, conversations we'd had, things he'd said, even some old financial documents I still had lying around, and submitted an anonymous tip. I knew it was extreme, but in that moment, I felt like it was the only way to get some semblance of justice. It didn't take long for things to unravel for Dan. A few weeks after I made the report, he got a notice that he was being audited. His whole world started to fall apart. He was slapped with fines, penalties, and back taxes that he couldn't easily pay off. Word got out in his professional circle, and he started losing clients. His reputation, which he had worked so hard to build, was crumbling before his eyes. Dan reached out to me, desperate and angry, demanding to know if I had anything to do with it. I played dumb, acting as if I had no idea what he was talking about. He was suspicious, but he couldn't prove anything. I thought I'd feel vindicated, maybe even a little satisfied, but instead I felt conflicted. I knew what I'd done was harsh, and I didn't regret standing up for myself. But as I watched his life fall apart, I started to question whether I'd gone too far. Yes, he'd hurt me deeply, but had I taken it to a level that was unnecessary? Dan wasn't just losing money, he was losing his career, his reputation, and possibly his future. I had made sure of that. Friends I've confided in have had mixed reactions. Some think he got what he deserved, that he needed to learn a lesson the hard way. Others think I crossed a line, that I should have just walked away and left him to deal with his own karma. And honestly, I'm not sure how I feel anymore. Part of me is still angry, still hurt by the betrayal. But another part of me wonders if I let my emotions get the better of me. Maybe I should have just let him go and moved on with my life. After all, revenge doesn't change what happened, and it doesn't erase the pain. It just adds more chaos to an already painful situation. So, am I the asshole for blowing up my ex's life by reporting him for cheating on his taxes after he cheated on me? Did I take things too far? Or was I justified in making sure he faced the consequences of his actions? I can't change what I've done, but I can't shake the feeling that I might have crossed a line. What do you think?
If you've hung out listening and gotten this far, you're probably pretty tired, so we'll say goodnight at this point. But don't forget to like and subscribe for more daily stories, entertaining sagas, and hot tea. We'll see you tomorrow.